This is the OKR podcast. Never pass on shooter bucks, because that's just meat in the freezer. It's your tag, you hunt how you want. This is Okayest Hunter.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Okayest Hunter podcast, coming at you from the Okayest Hunter podcast studio here in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. If you're not from here, I dare you to try to say that out loud right now, whatever you're doing when you listen to this. If you're at the gym, if you're in the car, go ahead, say Oconomowoc. Let me know how that goes for you. Anyway, we're brought to you by Spartan Forge. They are our presenting premier partner. Talk to those guys frequently. I think Bill's out in North Dakota doing some stuff on a farm and prepping for a vet hunt, among other things. He's got one of the more elite pro staffs in the whitetail world. And so I think he's going to be doing some fun stuff with all those folks. I don't know if we would be part of the pro staff. I think we'd be more like the bro staff. Yeah, like,
definitely bro staff.
We would not be like professional. We'd be very bro-fessional.
Yeah.
But no, good folks over there. And, of course, the app talk comes up organically in enough podcasts. I don't need to belabor it, but check out their satellite imagery. It's incredible. We had a winner from Foam Fest. I got to get their stuff figured out so they can get in the app for their year membership they got for free. But if you want it, check it out and try it out. You can use code OHP and it's going to save you 20% off, which is a fairly good discount. I'm still confused about last week's episode when I announced that wasn't, it wasn't 25, it's 20.
It's 20.
Yeah. So check those guys out. And I feel like I have more to say about that. It's because I'm wanting to talk about Foam Fest a little bit. So we'll get to that point before we bring our guest on. But Vector Custom Shop, I flung my new ZMRs out of a saddle on the 3D course. And
shoot nice, don't they?
They were great. I didn't lose any. That was a big deal for me. I didn't break any. No. I was hitting and killing foam all day with that, and it was awesome. So, and I have 12 arrows, 6 on my quiver. They all match. It's a beautiful thing. I've not had like
a matched set.
I've not had a matched set of arrows, and my broadhead's still questionable. I still got that one arrow with the broadhead on it. Yeah. I should put that one on that buck because I can't find the one, but that was it. That's the arrow and broadhead that killed that thing right there. So maybe I'll just do that as like a replica.
Just pull it out of there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't cut myself. Yeah. So Vector Custom Shop, you can use code OHP for 10% off. I know a number of folks we're at Foam Fest that are flinging those arrows that, also are excited to use our discount code to go buy some and get them like in hand before the season gets here. Latitude Outdoors. I talked about being in a saddle and flinging arrows. Greg brought his, I brought mine. Did you get up in yours or did you just let everyone else do it?
I had everybody else doing it. And I had like probably 10 different people that they wanted to try it. It was there available. I set up a couple sticks, my platform, hung the tether right away. So all they had to do is climb up one stick high and snap in, make the adjustments. I handed them their bow and they took shots at the block target. It was great.
Okay. Well, all right. Yeah, it was pretty cool to see. I know one guy that got in there, he didn't shoot from it, but he just got in it. It was like, okay, this is nice. They appreciated the 2-piece because of that lumbar support that you get.
Yep. Where
they're like, hey, am I climber? Am I, hang on, I don't get that kind of support. So, or like the 1-piece, you don't.
Well, Matt got in it too, and Matt's had a couple back surgeries, and he commented on how much more comfortable it is. So, and he ended up winning one.
He won it?
Yeah.
Matt did? Yep. I forgot, dude. I'm like just still like coming off of it, honestly. Yeah. And then, we gave away some Go Wild stuff also. And they're the ones that sent us the Vortex rangefinder too. So like shout out to those guys. We didn't go directly to Vortex. Go Wild hooked us up with that, which is really nice of them to do. Which, by the way, our hats are now on the Go Wild website. And if you want to save 10%, you can use code OHP on Go Wild to get 10% off your purchase. But as of today, by the way, our hats are now on Go Wild. We only have 3 styles at the moment, but they're there, which is pretty cool.
Cool.
But Go Wild, they share our ethos, and they actually were getting victimized. Again, I hate using that word, but they had some exposure to some deer shaming going on in their stuff.
Come on.
On TikTok. So not in their platform, but it was just like, man, you just can't get away from this stuff. I don't know what the deal is. It was someone was playing a prank, as a funny video with an antler on a trail cam, and the guy's like, "Why are you using a small antler?" Like, what do you care? I mean, come on, keep your comments to yourself, buddy. But if you don't want to have to deal with that kind of stuff, you can go Wild, and you can join, and you're gonna get $10 when you sign up, and you're gonna save 10% by using our code on stuff. It's like a shopping experience and social combined. So I think they call that social commerce.
Something to that effect.
I don't know who they is, but. So really unique place to go and not have to be dealing with that kind of stuff. And I am drinking some Drop Time Spirits, the last of it. I believe there's a new box of bourbon, a new case headed our way right now.
On its way.
So maybe this time next week I'll have some more bottles to crack open. We got their first ever batch, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Sweet.
I don't know where they're at now. But, before I bring on our guests, I do wanted to say thanks to everybody that came out to Foam Fest. If you're listening, thank you.
We totally appreciate it. And I can't thank you guys enough for showing some participation and coming out and having fun and spending the day with us.
Yeah, it was cool. It was good to see people. Everyone asked me how it went, and I've been intentionally not using the word a success. I've been using the word fulfilled because it was very fulfilling to see everybody, to have fun. It was a very relaxed, laid back, come as you are kind of experience.
Yep.
Kids were running around doing a shed hunt thanks to Derek. My wife brought like sensory bins and water tables, and they're chasing the drone around from the videography guy. It was just honestly a really good time.
It's very kid friendly and a good time for all.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that more probably at some other point. But we do have a guest on with us. So I want to introduce you guys to Rick Carey. He is I believe, Rick, correct me if I'm wrong. You're the president, maybe owner, maybe CEO, maybe all three of those things of Metalware Corp. But correct me where I'm wrong on that, and we can start diving into some stuff.
About all those things, president, CEO. Yep.
Great. Okay. They're all, yeah. I know they actually mean different things if you're on like a board and all that jazz, but we're happy to have you on the show tonight. You've kind of been on the podcast circuit in the whitetail world a little bit. I know a lot of the folks out there, but the Fair Chase podcast, I believe you talked with James and a couple other different folks. I think you talked to our friends over at Huntivore, Nick, Otto, if I'm not mistaken. So at the event, we're happy to have you in ours, and maybe just give the audience some context about some of your upbringing in hunting and some of the hunts you've been on, and maybe we can start there.
Sure. In Michigan's Upper Peninsula, doing my hunting. Our family my extended family had a potato farm, so I really grew up kind of hunting far more than anything. We had a lot of nuisance tags, so hunting was like just kind of a big part of growing up. Ran a trap line at a pretty young age. Primarily I'm a big grouse upland game hunter. That's probably my primary. That's probably what I do. Pointing labs I work with on that. Really enjoy it. But whitetail is sort of I grew up again with whitetail as a family. We would usually get somewhere between in a season that's an extended family with a nuisance tag. So kind of grew up November 15th is like a religious holiday for us. If you're from Michigan, you know what that means, because we always have that set date. It's always 15th. Do a Scots or other state first Saturday after this date. So grew up with that. As far as trips, I'm very fortunate because I have a lot of access to hunting up north, so I do most of my hunting up there still. But I've been on Western trips, elk hunts, and other hunts like that. Did spend a lot of time in doing pheasant hunts. Honestly, anytime I can get away and hunt, that's pretty much my hobby. Primarily, this time of year is my transition time into everybody knows I like to take time off in the fall.
Yeah, I bet. I'm wondering how that's going to go for me at my day job, how much time I can, they have unlimited PTO. So they say, we'll see how that looks come fall or the rut. I'm curious about that. I'm not going to take advantage of it, but I'm just saying, maybe I might test the limits. I've not had that luxury in the past to just like, hey, it's hunting season. A lot of other folks don't understand what that means to the guys like us that take that stuff pretty serious. So, so having been on, growing up around hunting, how did you, I guess, without getting too businessy, so to speak, but how did you get into where you're at now with Metalcore? Like, I'm assuming there's some business entity that exists there, and then your passion somehow seeped into that through some of the other products and categories that you guys are in.
Yeah, my background is I'm actually an attorney. I went to school, got my law degree there. I was a practicing attorney. The Metalware Corporation contacted me, to general counsel at their company. They looked at my background, especially with the outdoor side, to come on board. I did that about 2005 or so, and probably didn't need to hire me. They needed me in the moment, but they didn't need me long term. So I was full around here beyond my legal services, and they had a division of the company called Open Country. Was kind of an outdoor campwear line. We made the Boy Scouts kit for but I was working and developing that category. It was pretty small for a part of our company. I started taking my background in game processing, and about that time, this is again about 2005 or so, it was becoming a big deal. It was kind of migrating from the Colorado area, eastward. It was starting to shut down a lot of your local game processing. The butcher shops everybody had, and everything really made an impact on that. And I was working a lot with Cabela's at the time and a line. And I started using some of my experience with my family and growing up, and that's how people usually do game processing. Lots of times, guys go in and kind of cooperatively, and they buy one guy buys a industrial slicer, and I'm like, when we buy something from an auction somewhere, it was hard to come by. You buy an old Hobart and refurb. Well, we started looking at saying, hey, there's really not a consumer grade product out there. There's nothing we can go out there and buy without having to go to an auction or refurbish something themselves. But there's a lot of demand. Butcher shops started to go away. So we really started developing that. A couple of years called CHARD International, which was, my first name is Richard, so was my dad's CHARD or Chardy. So when you start a company up, one of the first things you do is try to find a website. So I found CHARD Products was available. I'm like, that's it. That's the name for our company. We started developing, really focused on game processing. So we started doing a lot more of things that were relevant. For instance, we created a stamp set, and we always, again, growing up, custom stamps made so that when we did butcher paper wrapping of the deer processing, we would stamp it with whatever it was. Was it ground? Was it a loin? Whatever it was. And I'm like, hey, that's really nice, but everybody's vacuum sealing nowadays. So we developed a stamp kit based, like a Sharpie based ink, and so I started taking my experiences from growing up, and then sort of adapted it to how the new modern culture, modern development was going. Would rotate around that. I would go look at a commercial butcher shop and say, okay, what in this for a consumer if I made it a little bit smaller? I didn't make it, as industrial. So our grinders, our slicers, our dehydrators, a lot of these things started coming up, seeing a need in the marketplace for that price point that wasn't $5,000, but still was better than what was out there. Because a lot of what was out there was being made in Europe type of processing, and we needed something a little bit heavier duty, but not commercial. Developed that, and then about in 2016, actually Metalware came back to me and said, hey, you come back and look at merging your company with ours. We're really, we do a lot of the same things. You incorporate within the company. I stayed close to the ownership that was there, so we merged the two companies, but that's kind of brought us here today.
It's awesome. I think we had some commentary on the audio, and it is tough to hear you. I have a solution here that I'm going to propose, and I'll just chop this out in post. So we'll fly it live for a second here, but I'm going to call you from I have a number on my computer that can make outbound calls. So it's going to come through a 262757. That might not be accurate. It's a 262 number. Basically, it's my Skype line. I'm going to call you from that. So it might end this here, which is fine. We'll just have the audio come through the phone, so that way we have a clear audio. So stand by here. We'll
Sounds good. Thanks.
bring that through right. Yep.
Hey, how's that sound?
That sounds good. And if anyone that's listening can just confirm, I'm pretty certain you should be able to hear Rick coming through. So I'll wait for a comment. Hopefully signal's good now on my side. For now, you can only hear the portion of your guest. Okay, well, it's good when we talk, of course. Yeah, if you want to just say testing or something real quick.
Sure. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Wow, that's nice.
Yeah, I hear you coming through. That's much better. Great. Okay, well, thank you. And sounds better is what we're hearing. Good. Okay, thanks, folks, for helping us figure that out. Appreciate that. Better. That's what we're seeing. Awesome. So you had merged the two companies. You had worked with like some bigger outdoor brands. I think you mentioned Cabela's, and it kind of set you on this other path. So are you in Wisconsin now, or are you still on the Upper Peninsula in the Michigan area? That's where you just grew up?
No. Yeah, my family's all in the UP. My camp's in the UP, but I live in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Cool.
And my wife's family, they're all from the UP. It's a pretty small world up there. So I won't say names now, but maybe afterwards we can. Yeah, maybe it'd be I don't know if that'd be a good thing or a bad thing if you know her family. I'm not really sure, but it's a great area up there. It's really pretty. Now,
it is. It's awesome.
Well, one thing we talked about offline was just in like bantering about using the NESCO product, because Metalware Corp owns a family of companies, NESCO being one of them, CHARD being another one. We were using one of the NESCOs at Foam Fest that we had gotten from you guys, and it worked great for starters. Like, they're an iconic brand in that category of, like, slow cookers and heaters and things like that.
Yeah, any large scale event, you're going to see a NESCO on a table or several NESCOs on a table heating something good.
Yeah, and I guess where we kind of went from that is Greg was talking about having to package that up, and you had already like expressed, oh, well, there's a way that you could do that really easily using this. And there's a lot of gotchas or aha moments that I feel like you have had exposure to that you could teach us as whitetail guys. And I wanted to really hone in on like early season whitetail because it's hot traditionally. And Greg got a doe 2 years ago.
Yeah, opening day. So, I mean, it's super important to get that deer out of the field, cooled down, stripped down. Obviously you guys make some products to help with that.
Yeah, especially early season. And if you're talking a September deer, I mean, you can still have days in September in the 80-degree range. And, one of my big conversations, especially bow hunting, it can be a little harder to get a quick kill in bow hunting than it can be in rifle. And just how quickly are you opening up that cavity to make sure you're chilling it down? That's just, I can't express how important that is. So field dressing quickly is huge. Separating any organs from the body, huge. Those organs retain so much heat, and that spoilage starts to begin pretty quick. Now, this all assumes that you got a good, like, lung or heart shot, and you don't have exposed bowels or stuff like that. But getting that, we sell a couple of products, especially we have a knife kit that's a really nice knife kit we developed that has a gut hook on it, has a caping blade, but one of the things that has a spreader. And it's funny because I've always I usually just use a stick as a spreader, which is fine. But the reality is that once I've actually had a tool that was designed for the job, it's much better. But getting those spreaders in there and letting just opening it up and letting the inside cool, and then I personally asked what an aha moment was, taking my cooler ice and packing the cavity with cooler ice. That's one of those tricks that I'm like, that just takes that internal temperature down so quickly. Now, another thing that I'm a big fan of, and I'm not necessarily doing this on my field dressing, but I like to cape my deer right away. And this is sort of one of those things where some people like to skin them right away, some people don't. People like to age them and hang them. If it's early season, to me, the faster I get get it skinned out, get it opened up, the faster things cool down. And the other thing is, it's so much easier. It's so much easier when they're warm. So again, anything you can separate out to get things to cool down quickly, especially in a September deer or October deer, it's just absolutely critical in my opinion. And then, making sure you have a clean cavity. That's the other thing, especially with warm weather. If you're talking, mid-November, late November, and you get, sub-freezing temperatures, you get a little bit of bowel in there. If you don't ream it perfectly, it's not as big a deal. But when you get warm weather, you think about those microbes, they grow, they just thrive in that type of environment. So getting your cavity cooled down, especially on the inside, working yourself out, that's something that I'm a huge believer in getting that managed really, really quickly. And it really does help to get a good clean shot.
Yeah, well, that's field care starts with shot placement probably first above all else, and then sometimes plan B can happen or things go wrong. I think Greg experienced that on the hunt he was referencing. Mm-hmm. But I don't know anything about aging deer. That's not something I feel comfortable doing because I don't know what I'm doing. But I'm all for like packing the chest cavity full of ice, and I think maybe even bringing a cooler with ice is probably a pretty good tip, because if you do get one, you're going to be in a much better shape. I took a quick ride to the gas station and packed a full ice. That maybe even that little bit of time had an impact. I don't know.
So I'll give just a lot of my advice came from my grandfather, who I'm sure killed more deer than most of us will ever see. But one of the things that he's a big believer in, if you've got a 3 or 4 year old plus deer, he liked to age. Yeah, his kind of philosophy on that was most of us going to get ground anyway. Especially on older deer, but kind of back to early season stuff. My shot discretion changes as the season goes on. If I got a really clean, nice shot, no branches, it's a nice, it's a nice shot to take. If it's a little bit more of a questionable shot, especially earlier in the season, I think about a couple ways. One is, if I don't get that deer relatively quickly, within a couple of hours, that deer's going to start spoiling pretty quickly, especially if the guts are still in it. So I just question my shots a little bit differently in the beginning of the season than I do towards the end of the season. At the end of the season, you're going to get a kill. They're going to lay down pretty quickly. They're going to bleed out a little bit faster. I shouldn't say bleed out faster, but they'll sit quicker. They'll stay put quicker later in the season. Now, the contrary to that is that if there's a lot of pressure in your area, that may not be the case. But generally speaking, if it's cold like that, that does happen. But the aging part of deer, just kind of going back to that for a second. I mean, the whole philosophy there is that, with a bigger, older deer like that, you have tougher muscle mass. And so if you age it, you allow the enzymes to begin to break down those meat basically start break down the muscle group. But because it's cold, because it's below freezing, you could do that safely. Because otherwise, true aging, you need to have a really dry atmosphere. You have to have a controlled atmosphere to be able to do that properly. And most people don't have that. But if you've got a really cold November, things are frozen solid, you can age on a pole relatively well, relatively safely. And the only time I ever recommend it is on an older deer.
Right. Well, and it's easy to make the mistake thinking you can hang that thing outside and all of a sudden we get a warm front, and that is where you start to see mold growing on it. I mean, then like you said, the microbes have kind of taken over, and they're really they're breaking things down, but they're also growing more and more microbes.
It's funny that I've been doing this podcast since 2013, and I still am just learning things all the time. You're just never going to stop learning. And it didn't even occur to me, and I should have. But again, I always represent the new hunter in the room, so to speak, or the idiot, whatever you want to call it. I'm not saying new hunters are idiots, but I am. The fact that you would do that with an older deer, that's an aha moment for me. I was like, oh, well, that makes a lot more sense. I probably should have let maybe that older buck age or something. Maybe it would have tasted better, less gamey. Happier wife then, because she hates the gamey taste. And if there's little things like that I can do to improve her experience of consuming venison, that's just going to be a better outcome for me.
Well, if you don't mind talking about that a little bit, I get that a lot on the gamey taste of how do I get away from the gamey taste, and some people love it. I mean, some people really enjoy that gamey taste, and it does change depending on where you're at. I mean, the deer that I'm shooting are usually swamp deer, so they're usually more gamey because of they're eating a lot of cedar, poplar type stuff. But if you're down in Wisconsin, you're usually getting corn deer. It's a little bit different. It's usually not as gamey. So one thing is just that the territory that you're in. But here's a couple of just things that you can do to help. Getting the silver skin off is the biggest issue. Yep. Silver skin and fat. I am not a fan of using my deer fat. I don't think it tastes good. I think there's plenty of fat out there that you can use from a butcher shop. I personally, if I need to add fat, especially for sausage making or hamburger, I typically use pork, but you can use pork or beef. But if you use the fat from the venison fat, and some people are purists and they really want that, you're going to have a gamier, stronger taste. But if you've got a family that, hey, most of us, I would say, most of us, probably speaking a lot of your audience right now, they're taking a 1 pound pack of venison that's already been mixed 3 to 1 with either pork or beef, and they're thawing it out, basically making tacos or making beef stew. They're making something like that. Typically, you don't want that gamey taste. That's at least allow what my deer become, other than loins and tenderloins. That becomes a lot of ground meat. So you don't typically want those flavors permeated into it. So silver skin removal is huge. Plus, when you go to grind your deer, that silver skin gets wrapped around the auger, gets wrapped around the blade, and you're constantly disassembling, trying to clean that back out again, because it will really slow down your capabilities of grinding. So I'm very diligent on taking the silver skin off. And I know a lot of guys are basically just start quartering up their muscle groups and throw it right in the grinder. That's fine, but you're going to have a much gamier taste to it if you do it that way.
Do butchers do it that way? Or are they just...
Well, mine did. I mean, I asked him just grind pure venison, because otherwise it was so much more per pound to add either pork or beef tallow to it. So I had mine pure ground, and that's what we had in the sloppy joes. I mean, you could taste it was venison. No question about it.
I couldn't.
But every butcher I know does not take the silver skin off.
Yeah.
It's too labor intensive. So, like, if you're getting it from your local butcher, or just a local processor, they may take off, a little bit, especially when they're separating muscle groups. They may, take some of it off. But generally speaking, no, they're chilling it out, they're freezing it, or getting close to frozen and grinding it, which will help grind through the silver skin. But that fat and silver skin that's where you're getting your flavor. Now, the other thing too, and it's kind of common knowledge, not everybody does this, but when you're talking about basically just ground meat, you don't know if it's yours or not, for the most part. So some
Sure.
butchers are very good about that. That's your deer, that's your meat. But generally speaking, you're doing batch grinding. So again, I'm a big believer in a quick kill. If that's a fact, you tend to have less gaming. It definitely has less adrenaline pumping through it, which does. So if you get like a gut shot, or you get a very light lung shot, you typically have that deer's going to run hard for a little while. Which is, the first thing happens, those adrenal glands open up. You're going to pump a bunch of adrenaline into the muscle groups, and that thing is going to go. And when that happens, that meat changes flavor. And I'll tell you, once you do it, honestly, like once you've done it a few times, you taste the difference between the two. It is noticeable. So a good clean kill, get it cold really quickly. Those are things that are important. And then also, most of the people who use our equipment, who want to process themselves, they don't mind taking the time. It's about the full, I always call it the full circle, right? I mean, you do your pre-hunt, you're out there in this, you're getting game cameras out, you're doing all this stuff, get your kill. Yeah, you can drop it off a butcher. There's really nothing wrong with it. But if you've done all that work, all that preparation, why not close the circle? Why not, do the rest of it, which is really going through, separating out your muscle groups, separating, because when I say separating the muscle groups, I mean, there's muscles upon muscles. So if you're taking them apart yourself, there's silver skin in between muscle groups that you're going to want to take out of there.
Always.
Once you do that, you're gonna have a lot better flavor. And then you don't have to grind everything. You can then start doing slicing and frying. And I like cast iron, so just start a little cast iron with butter on it, little Lori seasoning, throw it in there. That, to me, that's a great way of eating venison. And for those who've never really had venison done that way, it is a different flavor, and usually people really enjoy it.
It's delicious that way.
Yeah, I've been learning my way around the cast iron skillet in the last 3-ish years, and I've really enjoyed it. It does make a bit of a mess in my kitchen, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, for years,
you're always doing that so towards,
Yep. For years, it was always tradition. The first deer on the meat pole, we took the inner loins out and carved them up and in the cast iron with butter and some onions and some mushrooms, and then cracked a few eggs and put them in there. I mean, that was phenomenal breakfast fare.
Yeah, it sounds
like you were at our camp. Yeah, we did the exact. Actually, we would always somebody, because we had nuisance tags, so we would always get, and it was sort of intentional. We would shoot a young deer, basically that year's spawn, or
you gotta have some camp meat.
Yep, and what we did though, rather than the tenderloins, on the back hock, so the back leg, just above the knee, but on the back, there's a chunk of meat right there on a young deer that it rivals anything from a tenderloin to a loin. Especially on a yearling, and it's got a little bit more fat in it. It's actually I really like that cut, and that was always sort of our tradition. We'd cut that out of the back hind quarter like that, and then slice that up and fry it, and butter and onions, stuff like that. Didn't do the egg.
It's like the eye of the round almost. It looks like a hunk of tenderloin. It's real small, and on a younger deer, it looks like an inner loin almost, but. Even in a couple-year-old deer, it's still a really nice hunk of meat. You can cut it into doubloons and make it in a fry pan just like that.
Some of the comments that are coming through, Missy, who's a frequent listener down in Florida, she says they skin them, quarter them, put them on ice for a couple days to age, just to have to drain the water and add ice as needed. And then Tony commented, said hanging or aging certainly has become more popular here in Wisconsin while waiting on CWD results, which is a really good point, because oftentimes some folks really do want to wait on those results, and more people are testing. So he said he's working on a hanging room. So those are good points. And quartering up deer is a whole different thing. Like I it's not totally needed. The style of hunting that we do here in Wisconsin, by and large.
I've had to do it a few times.
Okay.
A few deer that I've taken early in the season. I've got 2 very large 5-day coolers that you could stash a human being in. So
why is that always got to be the comparison?
Well,
it'll fit a person.
I mean, it's fit 100-some pounds of salmon in it too from Lake Michigan.
You're right. Yeah, that's a good point.
But that's your freezer box. So you chock it full of ice and you put the quarters in. And luckily, I have 2, so I had enough to put a whole doe in there. After I caped it off.
Rick, one of the things you mentioned, I'll circle back a little bit, is, we're talking about time to get to the deer after shot, time to get it cooled off, time to get out of the field and so forth. We say we want to be as quick as possible. Like what's relative to that? Like what is the cutoff point? Like when you got to start being worried about it, or when are you going to start having degradation of that game?
Well, let me back up a little bit. And, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are longtime hunters and know this, but, one of the hardest things in the world to do, and I bet you guys will agree with this, is to sit patiently after you shoot and just sit there. And I don't think time ever goes as slowly as post-shot sitting in your blind. And, you got to sit there, you got to let them bleed, you got to, wait. So there's that aspect that, just remember, that's important. You have to let them bleed.
Good call out, right? Because then when we're like, oh God, do I got to go quick? That's what I mean. Like how concerned should you be, right? Like it's got to be relative to something. So this is a good point you're making. Thank you.
Yeah, it's relative. I mean, if anything with, again, it's also relative. It's, if it's 90 degrees out, that time changes dramatically. But if it's, you're talking about like an early deer call September, you're likely in the 60s. Assuming that you're either a morning deer or an afternoon, deer.
Temps will drop in a rising,
you've got a good hour before that, that there's any real concern, generally speaking. And even after that, as long as you're rinsing things out and you're, you're good, just the rinsing things out and cleaning out the bowels is more important than probably the time of that part. I can't stress enough of how important it is to get that clean. And when people are first, especially folks who haven't done a lot of, field dressing, that reaming out that you do, it can be, it can be a challenge to try to do that properly without making a mess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Believe me, I know. You're talking to the, there's like the guys that just make those dad sounds, like grimacing and grunting, and that's me, and swearing, of course. It just never goes right. But I'll let you go on.
I'll just keep going back to my grandfather. He did everything with an old timer pocket knife. An entire deer. We'd always field dress with. He popped this. I have a vision in my head of just he popped this thing out and flip open the blade, and he'd be bloody up to his right above his wrist. And that would include reaching up and getting the esophagus. And I'm just like, how does he do that? Like, when I do it, it's like I'm bloody on my backside. I'm like, I'm crawling inside the deer to try to reach up as far as I can. And I've done a number. I've done probably more than most, but I was like, how did this guy do that? But he was always so meticulous about the lower bowels. And, if I can just reiterate one more thing with your listeners, when it gets, the esophagus, don't worry too much about that. That's the far end, but that lower end, getting a good ream and then getting that and then pulling that back through, pulling those guts out and getting them out away from the chest, the cavity itself is so important. Then I always flip the deer over, get that blood to drain out too. All those things are important because all that retains heat, but it also is all going to retain bacteria. So once you do that, pouring water in, I carry a couple 2 liters full of water from camp. I'll just have them on my blind, and I'll just rinse out with that. That too really helps. Not only does it wash away any bowels you may have nicked along the way, but it also helps cool it down. Just that evaporation process really does help with that. So having a couple 2 liters around or a milk jug that's clean and being able to pour that water into that chest cavity or into that cavity, that's really important to help cool that down. Plus, it has the added effect of just washing things down as well.
Absolutely.
Good points. One of the gentlemen that's commenting here said he's been doing his own deer since he started a few years ago. And he's talking about just putting on ice and warmer climate in North Carolina. Usually turns around about a day or so. And I butchered my own deer once a number of years ago. I did the whole thing, with some guidance, certainly not total help because they were unwilling to help me because they're like, no, you need to do it on your own, which is great. But they were guiding me. And it took me all day because I don't know what I'm doing. It was really like a weird process, but it was great to learn the muscle groups to some degree and to go through that process. And then I did take a lot of good care of that meat. I did, to the best of my ability, cut out as much silver skin as I could. So once I got that meat home, I further kind of processed it even more and then package it, sealed, and all that stuff. So I think, yeah, I like kind of how we're talking right now because the season's so close that you can almost taste the venison, and there's a smell too. Hopefully you didn't get a gut shot because that's a different smell. But bringing that water along is important. My dad's taught me that. Pouring water in there, I think it's something that he's done that I've watched him do that I've also done. And usually have like a canteen or something. So then I'm just rinse my hands off. I'm rinsing my blade off. I'm pouring some into the rinsing the meat off and so forth. If you're dragging it though through, like you talked about a swamp. I know, Greg, you hunt. What do you call your swamp? What was that? Tag alder swamp.
Tag alders, cattails.
You're dragging it through that nasty muck water stuff. That can't be good for the meat either. But then get a sled probably.
It gets a good rinse if I don't have the sled and I'm not hauling out with a sled. But it always gets a good rinse when I get home.
Yeah.
Yeah. But because once you hang it, then usually you have a garden hose. You got something more, and just kind of get up there and get a good rinse. But that's one thing that a lot of times people are excited about the fact that they just got their buck. It's a big deal. Let's have cocktails. Let's celebrate. Boy, there's a lot that has to go on. It's fine to celebrate. I'm all for that. But at the same time, making sure that your deer is properly, especially in the warmer weather, properly cared for at that point, really, really important. That if you're going to hang on the pole even for a little while like that you have taken the right steps. Make sure that anything that causes that bacteria, like I said, anything in the lower bowels, or if you've got a nick, if you've got a gut shot. I mean, we haven't really talked about that because nobody wants to talk about gut shots. But if that does happen, it becomes exponentially more important that you address those issues.
Yeah, and you want to avoid those things when you're gutting it out too. You don't want to nick a gut and then create your own problem after the fact. That's always a pain in the butt. So it is important to take your time. What's the military? They say slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Like you'll get through it a lot faster if you just take your time, because you're not going to have to like deal with all the other drama of stinky guts if you just don't, do that.
And if I could ask you a question really quick, you said a couple of years ago they had you sort of, quarter up and begin processing your deer. Once you start, once you peel that bark back, and once you've actually skinned them out, you start looking at those muscle groups. It wasn't very hard, right? I mean, you get your hand in there, you start, most of it you start moving with your hand, you separate them out, maybe use your knife, just cut it off at a certain point. It really is pretty intuitive. So folks that are sort of on the fence about whether to do it or not, let me just say, you're not going to wreck anything. You just, the worst case scenario is you put it in a grinder and you make hamburger out of it. It's not a big deal. And when you're talking about loins or tenderloins, the one trick there, use your hands to the very end. Like you put the knife away. You can get in there and separate that stuff out of warm deer. You can separate that stuff out all by hand. You're not going to make a mistake. Even if you do use your knife on it, just stay as close to the bone aspect, the backbone as you can. But anything else, in the worst case scenario, is you're going to make hamburger out of it. So go ahead and do it if you want. If you wanted to give it a try, if you want to have the experience, for me and for a lot of folks, just knowing you can do it is half of it. Just knowing that you have that in your quiver is important. So for those who want to do it, you can buy a grinder or a slicer and get knife set and do it yourself. For a couple $100 you can get it so you can do it. Do it yourself kind of situation. It's fun. I mean, it's fulfilling. It's a great way to do it. And again, just to know that you're capable of doing it, at least for me, that's a big deal. I like to know that I can do things.
Absolutely. And it helps you understand the anatomy of the animal a lot better too.
Yeah.
When you make a shot, you can see where you put the shot through the body cavity, and you can kind of dissect that a little bit and understand, maybe I should have pulled a little bit further forward on this, or I could have been further back and still been okay. It's pretty helpful to be able to do that.
I personally, I usually cut my guts open once they're separated and open, just to see what they've been eating. That's kind of interesting too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys, we've always, if you get a buck, we always hang testicles in a tree. That's more or less to indicate that you got a buck. I'm not really sure. I mean, I've always done that just because my grandfather did it. I'm curious about how many people do that, but
yeah, we'd say here. My dad does it. I do it. Yeah. It's a thing. It's just like a thing. You don't even question it.
It went there.
Yeah, you do. Right. It's one of those weird things you do that you don't even question, but you're like
tradition.
Like 3 years ago, I have 3 younger kids, and I took them all deer hunting, and I had a little 4-corn buck. They've been hanging around for most of the season, so I took them on the last day because they really wanted to learn how to field dress and how to do everything. So I took him and we went through the whole process. I laugh at 2 levels. First of all, they were amazed at the actual gutting process. I mean, it was good for them to experience. I'm a big believer that kids should know where their food comes from, that they should understand that process, and they shouldn't be afraid of it. They should embrace it. So I'm a big believer in that. So that was kind of fun. And they enjoy that. They help skin it out and, take it down. When it started coming down to quartering it up, it was funny. So again, growing up, we always had, my brother and I, when we were little kids, we always had sword fights with the front quarters. And my kids did it like naturally. Like I looked over and I took a picture of it, sent to my brother, because like remember when we did this when we were like 7? And there are just certain things you do that, some of them are tradition that you learn, and some of them are just probably human nature. But we had such a good time, but where it broke down, so I hung it from my tractor. Where it broke down is about halfway through quartering it, and they just got bored with it. Like, it was a real work start. I think that's when my kids lost interest in it. But I'll tell you what, it was a great experience. Very seldom do kids get an anatomy lesson like that. And it was so real, and it was right there, still steaming. And, the initial sort of shock of it went away within a minute. And then it was just great learning time. And we talked about, where the liver is and where the heart is and where the lungs are. And I intentionally, neck shot this one because I wanted to have the ability to do that. So it was just, it was a nice experience for me to do with my kids. My kids still talk about it today. It was fun to do. It was fulfilling. You mentioned fulfilling earlier. When you said that, I thought about that. That was a fulfilling day to have that ability to do with them. And I just remember hanging the testicles in a tree, and of course my kids are like, my boys are like 10, 12, and they just thought that was the world. But it was a lot of fun. And again, I would encourage anyone who hasn't done it to give it a try.
It's worth doing. I was in college at the time. I didn't have 2 pennies to rub together, and I was like, I'd rather not pay to get this thing quartered up and butchered out. I'll just do it myself and figure it out. And I did. And like I said, I had some guidance, but it was like, hey, feel for this muscle. And you feel where that ends. Yep. No, you can just kind of run your thumb along this. And I was like, okay. And I didn't really know what the hell I was doing, but I could feel that stuff. So it made some sense. But it's probably good to have some mentor or a really good YouTuber maybe showing you how to do it, so you can walk through it. But it's good to hear like, hey, you're not going to mess it up so much so that you can't recover from it. I would feel guilty if I wasted a bunch of meat that that I didn't do the animal, I didn't pay enough respect to it or something. But there's a learning process, and obviously you do things, get better at it, and it's tough when you only do this once every so often. You may not get a deer next season, so maybe it's 2 years since you've done this last. So it's hard to build up that muscle memory of that repetition of doing something. But if you do it enough over several years, like I got a buddy, Shane, who's at Foam Fest, and he's got a deer camp in Adams County. They have a big tradition at their deer camp where they all come together and butcher deer, the week after the opener or whatever it ends up being. And they got a bit of an assembly line kind of thing going. And they chop, they cut, they package, and they do their thing. And that is part of their tradition. They got tunes playing, beers flowing, and they're doing their thing. And it's a lot of work, and everyone takes their part. So they run their little butcher shop out of their, pole barn or whatever it is. And that's part of the fun too. So you talk about like knowing where your food comes from, and like you just treat things differently when you labored over it. Drop it off at the butcher's fine. I got a lot of time. $80 ain't a big deal anymore these days, like it was when I was in college. But there was something to me doing that myself. It does change the dynamic a little bit.
It does. And if I just add on, we had a very similar process. It was always Black Friday. So like we would get things set up after Thanksgiving dinner. We get the assembly line all set up, and then that Friday we processed. And we always made potato sausage. That was like the biggest thing for us. My grandmother would always be at the one end of the assembly line and like tasting the raw venison and pork, making sure the flavor was right before we'd stuff it into sausages. It's funny because you grow up with it and you sort of think, you grow up in your own little world as a kid, and you think everything is normal.
Yeah.
This is it. Get beyond that, and you're like, hey, that not everybody does that. And then all of a sudden, I had friends in college who were loved to hunt, and I would bring them up to that, or we'd do it ourselves, and it added a whole new dynamic to it. And even in my own life, like I really never thought, I went and became an attorney and I went and did my thing. The reality is I don't really practice anything like that anymore. I do a lot more in game processing, stuff that I grew up doing, and that life experience is just translated into a whole business and what I do. And I couldn't be happier about that. And, unfortunately, my grandparents aren't here anymore, but they would be thrilled by the fact that that was the evolution of it. So, I'm incredibly grateful that I've had those opportunities, but that's one of the reasons why I really want to encourage others to do it. Just go out there and do it. That bonding, that camaraderie that comes along with that part of the processing, it's primal at some level. I mean, you can imagine that, generations upon generations ago, that's what people did to sustain themselves and brought them together. There's something about doing that is very primal, very, very bonding. Until you've done it like that, it's hard to explain. But I would encourage people to do it.
100%. There's a feeling of when you've had a hard day of work. If it's fall and you're raking and you're mowing and you're bagging and you're mulching and doing this crap, and you're like, man, I'm tired. That was a long day of doing stuff. When you do stuff and you labor over food as the labor that you're doing, that's where the dynamic, I think, really changes for people. I'm really tired. I worked really hard, but it was to prepare the food that we're going to eat. No, like there's a small, tiny percentage of the population that does that. that's where it changes things. And you have to see it. A lot of people don't like to see where their food. They don't want to see that stuff. I don't want to see the meat. I don't want to see how it comes together. I just want the output. It forces you to connect with it in a different way. And if that turns you off, then hey, that's okay. But now you have to think about your other stuff differently too. You can't just expect that it comes out this magical way.
Yeah,
you know,
might make you rethink taking a couple bites and throwing it away.
Yeah. Tell my kids, what are chicken nuggets made out of? They don't know. Chicken. They're made out of chicken. You see that chicken? It's from a chicken. What about the burger? What's that made of? My daughter the other day literally said tigers. She thought hamburger was made out of tigers.
Probably because she heard someone call it tiger meat once upon a time.
Yeah, but I'm like, just no clue. I'm like, it's a cow. It's a cow. So like, I'm trying to like tell them like that's a cow. When you see a cow in the field, we eat those. That's your burger, but they know deer. They know deer is food. They've gotten that from the get. They've never questioned. Yeah, can I have deer? They want deer. They want venison. It's called deer, but. So it's just interesting that most people don't have a clue, and that's okay. I'm not saying that's bad.
It's a large disconnect.
It just changes how you view things, and sometimes that's for the better for some folks.
It is. I'll even beyond the processing side. I mean, hunters are usually the biggest environmentalists. We want strong forests. We want strong deer populations, but we understand that those things are, because of good management, that's how these things work. That's why, we might pass on a yearling, we might pass on a forkhorn because we know they're going to get bigger next year, or we know that, this is going to help my deer population, or why we might put hay out in the wintertime. Those, when you start looking at that, it all comes together and you start getting a new appreciation for, how you fit in with all of this. And to me, we've lost a lot of that. We've lost a lot of how we fit into the overall hierarchy of things, and doing your hunting is a part of that. That pre-hunt, the hunt, all that's a part of it, but processing is a part that, in my opinion, we've gotten away from, because there's a convenience aspect of going to a butcher shop, letting them do it. It comes in nice and clean package, put in your freezer, you use 1 pound at a time. But there is something, you do start to miss things when you do that. So again, I enjoyed it. I still enjoy doing that. When I'm out west, I typically, just because of traveling, I usually have it processed out there, but I usually also, just because of my background, will go talk to the processor and have a nice, fun conversation.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I guess, man, this is a great topic, and we're running up to the top of the hour here, but I guess I did want to hear about some of the products that can make things more efficient or clean. Like I have the burger press from you guys. I just got that last week. I've yet to use it, but now I just really want a burger because I have that and I have an excuse to try something new and make burgers. So, I'll be making some venison burgers here pretty soon. But, even the stuff you talked to Greg about, like changing out, how you package up things. Like, I don't know, what are some things that you guys have going on over there that you're excited to talk about as it relates to what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, let me give my little kind of pitch about who we are and how we do things, and that'll tie into some of these products. And I can use the burger press as a great example of it. I'm very involved with product development. I would say that I'm an average guy. The burger press is a great example. I used to be kind of bummed out. Like, I like making my own hamburgers. I usually make a blend of venison hamburgers, but I'll do that. And most burger presses out there are the size of a bun. And I would make a burger, and I would do, I'd add cheese into it or feta, and I do these awesome burgers. And then when I cook them up, of course, that burger shrinks. Yeah, it shrinks like 20-30% as you're using hamburger in it. And I was like, man, this stinks. I made these things myself, and they're smaller than the bun. I'm like, that's it. So I designed a burger press that was larger. And then I also didn't like the idea that it would cook basically it would overcook on the outside before the inside was done enough. So I added little dimples to it, knowing like a golf ball, and I did some research on how heat transfers. And I'm like, I'm a designer burger press that does this. So my pitch to a lot, again, related to my product, is authenticity. I am out there doing it. I'm out there hunting. I'm out there taking my own life experiences and making them into products. A lot of times what ends up happening with some of my competitors out there is they'll see something and they'll say, great, buy that off the shelf, put it in, people will buy it. Grinders were a great example of that. They really didn't make a consumer grinder in the United States. I was the first one to develop one, and the first thing I did was a complete catastrophe, because when I did that, the auger broke. And the auger, the drive mechanism. I'm like, okay, well, venison's harder to grind than beef or pork is. It's just the muscle groups are more developed, stronger. So I had to fix that. And then when I fixed that, I had another part break. And I was like, okay, I need to fix this. I need to make this stronger because of this. And as I started going through things, I would make them better every single time. I would be the one product testing. I'd be doing it because I'm like, well, why isn't this working? And our products come from a place of authenticity, where we use the products, we test them, we try to make them better all the time. Grinders, again, are probably one of our big, where we have unique products. We have an FG1000. It's a great number 12 grinder. 12, sizes on grinders, usually go from 8, 10, 12, basically all the way up to 22 and 32s. So that's throat size, larger the throat size. So we do a 12 grinder, which for most people is about the right size. And that grinder, if I can, just one of the things I noticed is that when I was pushing down on most grinders, you have a little meat, you basically have a tube where the hopper is, and if it's a feed tube down to the auger, that was always ahead of the feet. And I noticed that when I'm pushing my meat down inside of there, basically the thing would always tip forward. So I'm like, why don't we just extend the feet out? I'm always using a stainless steel mixing bowl for my meat anyway. We'll put the feet forward, we'll put a mixing bowl in there. Now when I push down, it's over all 4 feet. It doesn't tip anymore. That was a big thing. The other thing was I put my grinder away, and you use a grinder personally I probably use about 8 to 10 times a year. Well, most of the time it's in storage. So I put a cord storage in it because I always hate when cords are everywhere. So if you look at that, the other thing that would happen with grinders is people would over grind. They would just do too much at one time, and that's just typical of us guys. I put a thermal reset switch because it's just as easy as popping out the bottom. If you overload it, pop it back in, you're back in business. Otherwise, you got to replace a fuse. There's nothing worse than if you're in the middle of processing like 3 deer, than having to run 30 miles to town to go get that fuse to replace. So a thermal reset switch. All these developments our products come along with because we use our products. And we try to think how to make them better for the person who's using them. And that's a big differentiation between us and a lot of others. A lot of them are being designed in China or they're being designed in Europe. Nothing wrong with either of those places design their products, but they don't live the lifestyles that we do. So our products are being designed by the people who are using them. And whether you're buying, a bow, an arrow, a gun, a vortex, whatever it is, you want to buy those things from people who are using them and know where the shortcomings in the marketplace are, and then think about how to make their products better or fill that need that people will have. And that's a lot of what our products do. That's a hell of a pitch. It's not to say you're old, but to be doing this as long as you've been doing it and still have that kind of fire when you speak about it is pretty impressive. I'd expect younger guys to have that visceral type of feeling about their brand and their products, and you have it just as much as I'm guessing the day you started. Maybe now I guess more wisdom, but it's a hell of a claim. That's awesome. It's a lot easier when you really like what you do. Well, that's just it. Yeah, you can tell. And if you're going to put your name on it, if you're using it, how embarrassing if it's not going to do the thing that you intended it to do. You're like, damn it. People are going to give you crap at your deer camp, quite literally, if your stuff isn't doing what it's supposed to do. So therefore, not saying that's the driver, but that's like a component of it. So you talk about people that actually use the products, developing it. That sounds great, but quite literally, you're like, no, it should do this or it shouldn't do that, and that's fantastic. Like the grinding up 3 deer and a fuse blows it. Well, why have to even go run for a fuse? That's silly. Let's engineer to not have to worry about that problem. That's fantastic, and that's not something that you're going to put on a box. That literally came. That really came from our deer camp. That exact thing happened. And I'm like, well, why are we doing it this way? They make a thermal reset switch. I've seen them on vacuum cleaners from 1970. I'm like, we can incorporate that into it. And it literally came from what you just described is literally how that particular evolution of the product came about. Yeah. And I was like, driving to town, and I'm just like, I can't believe I got to find a 15 amp fuse, to get back to where everybody's waiting on me. It was embarrassing. And quite frankly, those are the types of things. If you buy our products, or you get into our products, that's what you can expect. I mean, is that they're relevant to the people who are using them. Yeah, that's cool. And I'm glad you're speaking to it because, like I said, that's not something you're going to see on the box and some fancy marketing jargon.
that is going to speak to someone. But for those that listen that are tuned into this stuff, that are the diehard, whitetail fanatics, whether you're okay at it like us or not, it doesn't matter. If you're hunting deer, this is a product that can speak to you. And if I'm not mistaken, your price points are pretty favorable also. Like I can go to Fleet Farm or wherever, and I can pick this up off the shelf. You guys are direct to consumer. I can buy online, and these price points are favorable. There's some products that are like really expensive. I won't say any names on this podcast, but I think your price points that I've looked at are pretty approachable for most folks.
They are, and we have we have a spectrum like anybody else, and you can go into an inductive motor grinder, and that's your continuous run type motors on a grinder, and you can spend easily $1,000 on something like that, and if that's your needs, that's great. Get a foot pedal and you're off to the races. It's fantastic, but we make products in all price ranges because not everybody needs that $1,000 grinder. Hey, we make $1,000 grinder, and if it's your needs, that's what you should have. We also make really good product at prices where it makes sense, where essentially you can just say, look, I'm not going to have my deer process this year. I'm going to do it myself, and use that money to buy the equipment and then do it every single year. Cool. And that was part of our philosophy, is to make equipment so that the one guy can get it, do it in his garage, be able to have the right equipment for it, and not just be frustrated to the point where like, well, I tried that, it sucked, I don't want to ever do it again. Our equipment will work for you. It won't bust the bank. Again, we have semi-commercial products as well. If you're going in a big group to buy something like that, or you have a reason for processing that much, we have them. They're extremely good products. But for the most part, that FG 1000, that's a solid grinder that basically, if you're doing 4 to 5 deer a year, no problem. It's a perfect grinder for you.
It's cool. Yeah, and a lot of folks are maybe grinding up their meat, far after the season too. Like they've gone through the prime, the prime cut, so they want to, well, let's put I want to make some burger now with this extra stuff that I got from the butcher. Maybe they didn't do it themselves, but now they have a reason to fire up a grinder and make some burger, whatever they're going to do.
You bet.
Yeah. Actually, one of my suggestions, if you are going to have a butcher do it, my recommendation is get a bunch of stew meat. Have a lot made into stew meat because they don't mix it with anything super. It's basically just the 1-inch quartered meat. And then you can grind that into anything you want. You can add your own pork. You can add, you can wait for a sale, go get yourself some pork or get yourself some beef and grind it yourself in the ratio you want. Because if you're making burgers, you're going to want a little bit more fat. If you're making sloppy joes or, you're making, taco meat, you don't need as much fat. You're going to drain it off anyway. But in a burger, you want that fat to hold the burger together so you can, do your own mix. And again, burgers, I like pork. That's just my own personal taste. But you want that fat to hold it together. So get some stew meat and do it yourself. And then you only need one piece of equipment and you can do that at any time. And then if you want to get into jerky making, whole meat jerky is great, but ground beef jerky or ground meat jerky is super easy to do. And, I kind of like it better. I can add my seasoning to it a little bit. It has flavor all the way through it. I can make it without marinating for 3 days. I like that part of it. And again, super easy to do with ground meat. That's
awesome. That's a good. Have you ever done that, Craig?
No, I've never done.
These gears turning over here.
Yeah, it's extruded jerky, so you grind it up and run it through an extruder and squeeze it out and make it.
Tony asked. He's one of the listeners, and we get some questions we didn't get to. And Clayton, I saw your question come through. If you're still listening, it just couldn't find a good time to ask it, and maybe we'll circle back on that for you. But Tony asked, what fat meat ratio do you like?
Just pure fat. That's a good question. That's more of a feel. Here's what I'll do. I have a mixer, just like we sell a CHARD stainless steel mixer. It's like a ribbon blender. It takes about 20 pounds of beef. I will then, or venison, I will add it until I start seeing a consistency where the chunks are holding together. So like when you're going really lean, when you start stirring like that, you will get very small chunks that are holding onto the blade. As you start adding fat, it'll start to hold those chunks I would say about 1 inch to 1.5 inches in diameter. Once those chunks are starting to hold onto the blades, that's about the right ratio. If you're talking about adding pork to, like, I do a 3-to-1 ratio for most things. I like 3-to-1 venison to pork. That's my ratio. And I think that's really what your caller was probably asking, is what ratio. I like 3-to-1 I usually do 2 to 1 on beef because it's a little less fatty. But I almost always do pork myself. That's just, again, my preference.
Yeah, I think I did that one year with the butcher just to see if my wife would like enjoy it more or whatever. But I like the idea of getting it cubed into stew meat. That's pretty good idea. And then maybe we'll have to try out some grinding over here at the old OKS Hunter podcast studio. Maybe not in the studio literally, yeah, but somewhere in our house. So no, that's good. That's good information. And Tony said thanks. So thank you for asking the question. Where can you point people to get some of these things? Is it a box store? Is it online? Where can people learn more? How can they start to ingest some of this? Pun intended, maybe there. So we can set them off on the right tune here.
Yeah, so I would just say start with chardproducts.com. That's CHARD products.com, all one word. Go there and take a look. Do your research. I mean, half the fun, I don't know, in my world, half the fun is the research part of it. Just, hey, what do I want? What do I need? How can I use it? That's a great place to start. Fleet Farm is and Blaine's, Farm and Fleet, both big believers in our product, have carried us for years, and been big supporters of our Shield Sporting Goods. I personally love Shield Sporting Goods. I know a lot of the folks at that company. They are just rock solid company. They carry our products. They carry an extensive line of our products. I really enjoy them, and I'm sure I feel back. I'm going to leave some folks out when you say this stuff, but those types of places are great supporters of ours. We do some with Cabela's. We do some with Bass Pro. The reality is those guys do a lot of their own branded products.
Yeah.
So it's a compete with that. They like to promote their products. And for a long time, I made their products for them. I don't now, but I have in the past. But they're a good company. Unfortunately, I'm not a huge fan of the fact that they combined. So I thought it was a little better when they're separated. They competed against one another and seemed to have better development as a result of it. That's nothing about management. It's just, hey, that's the world we live in. When those things combine, you typically get less choices. But I would say anything, in the Midwest, State Farm, Blaine's, you'll catch some stuff from Menards, but that's not really, we're not there very much. We do more of outdoor cooking with them.
Oh, yeah, that's good enough.
Like fry.
Yeah. So chardproducts.com, and then some of those retailers are great for the folks here in the Midwest. Obviously, we got people in Florida and North Carolina listening and so forth. So like that's the website's a good destination for those guys and gals. And then if you're here locally, pick something up there. That's you can get a good look at it. Walk out with it right then and there, and maybe save yourself some money on shipping costs or what have you. But no, thanks for hanging out with us tonight. Thanks for hanging in there with the audio snafu in the beginning. Sometimes reception just is what it is. Luckily, we have a couple ways to overcome some of those challenges. So it worked out pretty well. The audio was a lot better once we get you on the phone here. So if you want to hang out with us for a minute, we can debrief real quick and we'll end the live broadcast. And this will be produced this evening, so it'll be ready for people to listen to right away.
Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much. Everybody that tuned in, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you. And till next week, we'll talk to you later.
See ya.